Good morning, everyone. Just going to give a little bit more time to let everybody get in and get settled. So we've got lots to talk about today, so I'm keen to get started. So I'll carry on letting people in as they arrive. But to everyone who's here, welcome to the second in our series of autism employment webinars. We are ARC England, and we are the only learning disability membership association in England, and we exist to improve the lives of people with a learning disability and autistic people. And we do that by our membership offer, which includes benefits like network meetings for all kinds of different subjects and segments of organisations, and for supported people as well. And we also offer training, DBS checks, qualifications, and all manner of things. You can find out more on our website, which we'll give later. Please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat if you'd like to. It's great to know who we are speaking with. And without further ado, I will just mention that we are recording today's session, so I will send the recording round to people afterwards. And I'm going to hand you over to David Sargent, who is CEO of one of our members, Real Life Options, and he's going to be chairing today's event.
Thanks, Liz, and a very warm welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us for your lunchtime, I assume, those of you who do take lunch. Very much appreciated that you're joining us. And this is the second in a series of 3 webinars. Last Friday was the first one, focused very much on autism in the workplace, but not in necessarily in the way that you might have thought of it as if you're an employer, of how do we support people we support in their journey through life if they're autistic. That's not really it. It's very much about, as an employer who should know about this subject and what it means for people, it's really about helping us understand ourselves a little bit better. Certainly something that I share very often in Real Life Options is, you know, don't think that you should be looking at treating people we support any different to the staff, and turn that the other way around. Staff often are the neglected party in this whole thing. We're very good, many of our organizations, at supporting people with learning disabilities, autistic individuals, etc. And we don't always think that much about the richness and the fantastic thing that our staff team is and what it brings to us. So this is very much about helping us to think and understand. Last week's session, we finished just about on time. It was tight. I'm not sure that this will be any different. I'll introduce you to our 3 panel members in a moment, and they can all talk the hind legs off a millipede, let alone a donkey. And so I think we'll manage ourselves as we did last week and keep things tight. But it is very much a session which is about giving you the opportunity to hear from people who are exactly in the context that we talk about. These are people who are employed in the sector, who are passionate about it, who've gone on their journey, their autistic journey in terms of discovery and what all that means. So you're getting that, but there's also an opportunity for you to ask questions. If you've got a really big burning question, you think, I really need the answer now, put your hand up and we'll try and fit you in. If it's a question that you think we can either answer in a discussion later, put it in the chat. And as I said last week, we won't miss anybody's questions or observations out. This is being recorded. It will be shared, and we will do our best to allocate some time towards the end in order to answer those questions. Liz, there are some polls today, are there not? Is there one that's live now or is about to go live? And then there's one at the end, which we'll pick up on. Do you want to just say something about those for everybody?
That's correct. I'm just going to launch the first one now, and if it works correctly, you should see a Polly up in front of you asking what you're hoping to learn about today. And if the tech plays ball, then when people respond, it should give us a word cloud. If everybody wants to pop something in, a few keywords perhaps about what you're hoping to learn about today, or perhaps a question that you'd like to ask. And all the attendees see the poll. Lovely, we've got some submissions coming in now, thank you. Okay, can you, David and the panelists, can you see the word cloud appearing?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay.
I can see it.
You can see it, Stephen, brilliant.
Yeah.
Yes, it's coming through now, yeah.
That's great. The deck is great, but there's always an awkward few minutes. Louise, you can't see anything. It appears in the chat, probably.
It does.
It does.
There's actually a poly tab at the top on some
And
people's screens. Just click on that.
thank you. Have a look at that. So it looks as if people would like to hear about the problems and how to solve them, and about understanding and around a work context. Karen's let us know that you need permissions. It could be something locally that's stopping that. So I'll close the poll now so we can commence the conversation.
Interesting that the biggest response is people. Is that not our life's work to understand ourselves? I don't know how successful we are, but yeah, if you think about the fundamentals of the sort of work that we deliver in our organizations, fundamentally we're trying to understand the people we support and what their expectations, needs and desires are, and that can be very challenging. So last week, just before I introduce everybody, last week the focus was very much on different perspectives on policy considerations and sensory differences. This week is very much more about the interaction of the individual and the organization, and there was some of that last week. So very much about routines, and I know that's something that Stephen's quite keen on talking about, for the stuff that he's read, on focus, the ability to focus, and creativity. And I know, Michelle, from what you've shared in the first week, you know, you're quite passionate about the sense of creativity that comes in an environment where somebody's working the world out from an autistic perspective, and just how powerful all of that can be. So I look forward to hearing. So I'm going to be asking the questions of the three in a particular order and changing that order. We've got three questions, but before I do that, I'm going to start with Clive this time and ask Clive to introduce himself very briefly in his background. Then we're going to go to Stephen and then to Michelle. We're doing it in slightly reverse order this week. So Clive, over to you to introduce yourself, please.
Hi, everybody. My name is Clive Parry. I used to work for ARC England. I've also worked in a variety of other adult social care settings, including I've been responsible for a large region of learning disability and autism services. So my background has been adult social care, I guess, since about 1989, I think it's a long time ago, that, isn't it? And I guess I'm one of those people who moved away, there are other members of this panel who are the same, moved away from commercial employment and into adult social care because I was drawn to it. And I now realize that part of the reason for that is because I'm autistic.
Thanks, Clive. Stephen?
I'm Steve. I work for Real Life Options, been in health social care about 20 years. I'm what you would call a 6-year-old autistic. So I realised I was autistic about 6 years ago. And my background is in autism and challenging behaviour, but now I'm the numbers guy. So going down the stereotypical aspect of being involved in numbers. I think David might have frozen there.
Can you hear me?
Sorry, dropped you off for a moment there. I'm back.
I answered the question, David, so it's back over to you.
Oh, thank you. It would do that, wouldn't it? Michelle, it's your floor then.
Hello, I'm Michelle. I'm the social media officer at Dimensions, and I am also an autism advocate in my own right. So I'm autistic, diagnosed as an adult with 3 autistic children, and I run a group called Minecraft and Meltdowns.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So our first question, which really is about focus, attention to detail, and seeing the big, and I would add in, it's not in the question, the small picture. It's both of those. The question is monotropism, and if you don't know what that is, Stephen's got a really good explanation. Monotropism is the theory that argues that autistic people are more likely to focus deeply on a smaller number of interests at any one time. Has this aspect of your diagnosis, if it is such, affected you at
I'll go
work?
upstairs, Gareth.
Sorry?
Yeah, sorry, I'll eat my lunch also.
I think somebody needs to put themselves onto mute if possible.
Sorry, just changing rooms.
Do you need me to repeat the question?
Don't have.
I think you're okay, David.
All right. Okay, so Michelle, would you mind opening with an answer to that? About 4 minutes worth, 5 minutes.
Yes. So absolutely having a really, really deep focus can be incredible and also challenging because of the way everybody else works in the team. One of the problems is executive function skills. So getting started in the first place is super, super difficult. So what I tend to do is check out my work stuff first thing in the morning, then go and do something, and then so I'm a night owl, so I tend to cotton on later on in the day, and then I'll just work and work and work and work. So flexible working absolutely is key for the way I need to work, and autonomy. Once I am hyper focused, I will miss emails, I'll miss meetings starting, I will miss meals. You know, it can be a real issue. I have so many reminders for so many things set up everywhere because I am super, super focused, and I could have literally just spoken to somebody. I need to go on a meeting at 12, and then 10 minutes later it's gone. I'm totally invested in something I'm doing. And one of the problems with that is working from home, well, working anywhere, is that when you get interrupted a lot with questions, because once you are hyper focused, you've got this wonderful depth of thought. You're analysing something, you're really invested in what's going on, and so when you have a change, like somebody rings the doorbell or phones you up or asks a question, and Teams, it keeps popping up in the corner, and that can really draw your attention away continually, and it can become quite irritating because you need to be doing what you're doing. To help me in work, sometimes what I do is I purposefully don't answer emails. If it's not urgent and it pops up in the corner, I will just leave it, because I then tend to go down a rabbit hole of answering that, and then I don't get back to where I was in the first place. So I do like to just purely concentrate when I'm concentrating, and not have this backwards and forwards all of the time in answering people's questions. If it can wait, it can wait. How that comes across is I'm ignoring important emails. So people understanding the way I need to work is really, really important to me, because it absolutely isn't. It's just me trying to best focus my time, because what you can get from it is a real depth of thought and a real hard working. I'm a real hard worker, and when I'm going to it, I am going to it. But I don't like the impression that you have to be at your desk, or you have to be active, or people checking up on Teams to see where you are, or you having to answer things when they come in unless they're urgent. You know, it's just, no, I'm still here and I'm still working, but I'm going to need to ignore you for a minute because I'm onto something here, and or I'm being creative.
So, Michelle, have you ever found yourself in a situation where, because you're focusing deeply on something, you actually get to the deeper essence of the issue or the problem? How do you cope when colleagues have not thought that deeply about something, have not invested themselves in the way that you have? How do you cope with that?
It's probably sometimes how it's how you come across, because sometimes it can look as if you're jumping to conclusions in so for example, if we have a meeting, I might be thinking about something that was discussed and I will answer later.
Yeah.
So when I'm hosting meetings, I always give people a chance to revisit any subject we've talked about, because what they're doing is they're in-depth thinking about that thing. Problem is they've missed other stuff that's happening, and that can be a real issue in colleges and schools, because you've just missed what was important while you were busy thinking about that. Sometimes you can, if a subject excites me, I can get really creative, be bursting with ideas, which is why I drew a picture of a person struggling with big light bulbs, because I'm just bursting with ideas, but I'm struggling with it because they all fall out and they all come out. And to other people, it can seem like I've not paid much attention and I'm just jumping in with ideas. But actually, I've got there faster because of the way I've thought it through.
Yeah.
So it can look as if I've not thought it through deeply enough, and it can be frustrating for me for other people not being with me. So I have to explain how I got there.
Yeah. Thank you. That's good insight. Thank you. Stephen, what's your answer to the question of how you apply your version of monotropism in your workplace?
That's yeah. How do I apply it? Well, I don't really have a choice, and I think this is the thing. It's not really an application thing where I'm making a conscious effort to get into that flow state. Sometimes it does. Sometimes I require to put myself into a flow state so that if, for example, I'm in a situation I feel either sensorially or emotionally unsafe, I might need to put myself into a flow state to block out those negative sensations. But generally speaking, I don't have much of a choice as to what grabs my attention. And when I get into that flow state, it's incredibly difficult to pull myself out. So a prime example was as part of my job, I was given a bit of work to do, which was looking as to why we don't use bleach in social care settings. So what is the thing? Well, 9.5 hours later, I hadn't eaten, I hadn't moved, I hadn't been to the toilet. I'd stayed in the same place. My legs had lost all feeling because I'd literally stayed in that one place. And I was looking at the inner workings of a vac hoover to find out what the wattage was of its output, because it said in the NHS guidance it had to be above a certain thing, but it didn't tell you what models produced that. So I had to go and find out. And it's that kind of level in depth that generally doesn't happen, or in my experience doesn't happen. But that wasn't a conscious effort, you know. It was, and it, you know, people say 9 hours. Really, it was, yeah, but it felt like about 15 minutes. And this is the one of the things is that temporal sensation, you know, when time just disappears. And I know time flies when you're having fun is a saying, but not like that. It shouldn't just disappear in the blink of an eye unless you're unconscious, you know. But it really, really does. And I came to the point where my wife had to drag me out of it so that I would actually eat something and go to bed, because I hadn't done any of that. But it is a thing. And one of the things I find with that monotropism, one of the difficulties is, especially in meetings, everybody likes to have an opinion in a meeting, and that's great. But when people start talking at the same time on different subjects, I don't have the capacity to be able to focus on both of those at the same time. I can't pick out what one is saying over the other. And what ends up happening is I don't hear any of it. So all of it just becomes this jumbled, noisy mess that makes no sense to me whatsoever. So, but then the same happens as well if, say, I'm having a conversation, it's a one-to-one conversation, and then somebody joins that conversation. I have to pull myself out of that flow with that person and try and apply that same flow to the next person. And it's okay if they join the conversation at the start. That's fine. Join halfway through and I really, really struggle and I find it exceptionally difficult. So if you have people who are autistic, be mindful of team meetings. Be mindful of those kind of open settings where you're expecting them to shift focus as easily as you do. And it's incredibly difficult for autistic people. While we can get to real depths and explore things at a level that you possibly wouldn't be able to, there's that other side of it where that focus is, is limited to those small number of interests. But monotropism for me was a theory that really resonated with me. It was the only theory that I found in terms of autism that I thought, oh my God, that is me. That all the other ones like the empathy systemizing and all of these didn't really resonate. It was monotropism and double empathy, which I think we get onto later on.
And so maybe you don't have to answer this, but what advice would you have for an employer, Stephen, if you were in one of your flows and they needed to intervene or interrupt you for something else? What's the way? And again, this is just you. It won't be for Michelle. It won't be for Clive. Other people are different. But for you, what would your advice to an employer be to say, if you want to talk to me and you can see I'm focused on something, this is how you do it, or you don't do it, leave me alone? What is it?
Well, generally speaking, it would be to give me time to pull myself out of that flow. Give me the time so that, say, look, Stephen, we've got this really important thing. I'm going to need you in X amount of time. Right. Then I can start preparing myself for that transition away from that flow state and then get my attention onto the thing that you want. But what you have to be mindful of is, as an employer, I am now going to leave that thing alone until I get the chance to go back to it.
Yes. Yeah.
So that will no longer be a thing. It's on that thing that you've asked me to do, and that will get done to the nth degree, and then you can tell me to move back to that thing. And that's the thing with it. It's the same way that we do for people that we support. You give them the time to process the information, time to get themselves aligned for the new thing.
Very, very insightful. Thank you. Clive, your chance to answer the question.
Thanks, David. Yeah, for me, there's a couple of things that I would want to talk about. One is that I think this attention to detail is very closely linked to Stephen just talked about processing differences. So there's something about how it is that we focus and pay attention to detail. And for me, it's a very methodical and systematic way that I do that. So one of the positives of that was when I was working in a firm of livestock auctioneers in Hereford when I was young. I was working in the accounts department. They would have many thousands of transactions in one day, and lists and lists and lists, thousands and thousands of numbers. And very often, at the end of the day, the sales wouldn't balance. And the deal was the people who did that clerking work had to balance the sale. They had to give it to me balanced. They weren't allowed to not do that. But I let them off it because I knew I could balance it faster than them. Because I didn't work in the same way as them. I would have complete quiet and silence around me. Nobody else could be talking to me or even talking in the room. I didn't want people in the room. If I'm doing this, I need to work through this in my own way. And I just ran through the numbers until I balanced it. And I think the upside of that is my boss loved that because it was a really positive thing. I had another boss who enjoyed my attention to detail and benefited from it, but actually used it as a bit of a way to criticize other people who weren't doing as well in that part of the job, which I think I hadn't expected that to happen. And it made me feel a bit isolated from my colleagues, actually. Essentially what she said is that they were saying to her, well, we can't do this. And she said in front of me and the whole team, well, Clive's doing it. And I was the only person that was doing it. But I suspect now with hindsight that the reason I was doing it was because of this ability to focus and to work in a very systematic way. The other thing for me has been about the way that it can limit progression. So for senior colleagues who tend to, I don't want to generalize too much about senior colleagues, but my experience of senior colleagues in the adult social care sector is they are not necessarily folk who enjoy paying attention to detail themselves. They are much more bigger picture, and they can be quite loose and not very specific, and sometimes not very clear about what it is that they want me to do. And I think one of the challenges for me is I think my focus and attention to detail has sometimes meant that I've lost perspective or not been able to see the perspective of the senior colleague. And I'm reasonably certain that it be linked to limitations in terms of progressing into more senior roles, because I wasn't seen as somebody who thought in that particular big way, if that makes sense. I didn't talk in the same way. I would have conversations in team meetings and I would just be saying, hang on, 20 minutes ago you said this, and that doesn't make any sense. And they've moved on and they don't care that what they said 20 minutes ago doesn't make sense, because they probably can't even remember it. But for me, everything matters, and all of that detail matters. And so I think it has had a limiting effect. And I think overall, I think like all of these characteristics, there's something about context, and they can be very positive things. They can also be things that can kind of be quite difficult for the individual that's autistic in the workplace, but also for their manager.
So, Clive, very, very briefly then, what would you say to an employer? How should they, or what should they consider when they are building their senior teams or thinking about building the senior teams? What should they consider in terms of skill sets and knowledge and abilities and ways of thinking? Because what you've just described is actually quite vital in senior leadership, and yet is missed sometimes for the very reasons you described.
Yeah, I think I know that Michelle in particular, you're not wild about psychometrics, but I actually really liked Belbin's team types. I don't think it necessarily identifies autistic traits and characteristics, but I'm according to the assessment I did it a few years ago, a completed finisher off the scale is what the guy said. He had never seen a number like it. It was just, he said that I've not met anybody that's as much of a completed finisher. But once we knew that the role I could play in the team was making sure I scooped up everybody else's ideas and saw them through to completion by paying attention to detail, by working in a systematic way. And there are a lot of folks who are generating ideas, but are not necessarily the same people who want to see those ideas through to completion. So I think in terms of the senior role aspect of it, play to the person's strengths, but I think also be cautious about boxing people in, because I was capable of much more than people thought I was capable of, but they saw that attention to detail and that very systematic way of working, and they saw it as a limitation in some ways. They saw that as not typical of a senior person, and actually, we're capable of a lot more than that. That's a skill that we can have, and it can sometimes be a pain in the neck, but there's so much more to us as well. Don't limit us.
Wonderful, thank you. So if anybody who's been listening to that conversation has a question, stick it in the chat and we'll try and get to it. And in the meantime, then we'll move on to our second question, which is really about routines and autonomy, is where we come from. I'll start with Stephen, if you don't mind this time. And the question is, can you share your experiences of both work and personal routines? And I'd add a little bit to that question, and share those experiences, but also share those points of comfort and discomfort that come from how those experiences work out, both at home and in workplace, because we're about context here. So it's about saying to your colleagues on the call, for me, I get uncomfortable when it's like this, and I'm comfortable when it's like that. If you don't mind, Stephen, thank you.
Yeah. Well, for me, routines are a means to an end. There is this thing of autistic people being routine-based, or, routine preference. But the routine is only a means to predictability. So where I get uncomfortable is when I can't predict what's coming, what's happening, what's going on. And when that space opens up, it takes a lot of energy and a lot of executive function, or spoons is another way. It costs me a lot of spoons to work out what is going to happen and what has to happen and the steps that I need to take to ensure that X, Y, and Z happens. So the routine, what the routine does is allows me that comfort of not using so much of my executive function or costing me so many spoons. And I know what's going to happen. I know what happens. So my routines are the same no matter what day of the week it is, because this is something I'm very, very grateful of in terms of the work that I do. When we're talking about autonomy, is I set my work pattern. So my work pattern is within the lines of my duties and what time frames that have to happen, but I set my work pattern. So I know what I'm going to be doing on any particular day, and I can work towards that. But my routine is always the same, whether it's personal or work. So I get up roughly about the same time. I take my dogs for a walk. I do X, Y, and Z, sit down, start work. And this is the thing that people, one of the great strengths of being autistic is I don't take time off. There's a reason I don't take time off, and it's not because I'm diligent or hardworking or any of this. It disrupts my routine. It disrupts my predictability, and I don't like that. I don't like, so if I'm ill, I'll still be at my desk because I'm going to be even worse if I'm removed from that predictability. I'm the worst patient in the world. If I'm unwell, I get grumpy, I get fidgety, I get anxious. My sensory stuff goes through the roof, and all because my whole routine is disrupted. But what I will say is, don't try and impose a routine on me. Don't impose what you think I need. We need to stop this idea that we know what autistic people need. No, you don't. You simply can't. It's impossible. We have to set a routine based on them, what their likes, their preferences, their needs are. And it's the same when you're at work. If you have an autistic employee, set the predictability around them because you'll get the best out of them at that stage.
Wonderful. All very, very practical stuff, isn't it? Really, when you talk about it, you think, yeah, it makes sense. But why don't we listen sometimes?
It starts with the research, David, and I have to say this, for years and years and years, neurotypical or neuronormative people told autistic people how to feel. And this was the thing, and it went right the way back. Now there is a bigger, stronger autistic voice that needs to be listened to, but it starts in the workplace. It starts with the people that are supporting others. It starts with the people that you support, is that understanding. Because, it isn't the case that neuronormative people are telling autistic people how to feel anymore. There is a stronger voice. Although, I won't get into it though.
Yeah. Enough said. We know where it goes. Michelle, how are you with your work routines and your personal routines? What's your commentary on that question?
Yeah, absolutely agree. That's what I was saying about executive dysfunction. It's changing from one task to another, and the spoon theory, if you haven't heard of it, is imagine you get a number of spoons of energy in a day, and everything that you do costs a spoon. So getting the bus costs a spoon, taking a phone call costs a spoon or two. It's taking up your energy, and you have to do something. To answer Nikki's query, you have to do things throughout the day to restore those spoons. So taking a decent lunch break for me is important. Having fidget toys, being creative, drawing, things like that, listening to music, they give me spoons. So that's how we like to, and that's why I wanted to work from home before it became fashionable, because I could control my atmosphere there and work in the way that suits me. I think it's really important that we're allowed to work autonomously, because that's how we get our best. We're not our best at 9 o'clock in the morning when we start work. We're at our best when the conditions are right, the stars align, our sensory needs are matched, we've got the ideas in our head and we go for it. and that's when we're at our best, and that could be 10 o'clock at night. If you imagine, humans generally have evolved to be able to just focus on the most important thing. In an example, you're trying to get away from a predator. You've got to just focus on the important things, get out of there, and make snap decisions and go. Some autism is a difference in the way the brain has developed, and we tend to absorb all of the information and not be able to block out all the other stuff. So we can hear electricity, the lights are bothering us, there's noise bothering us, the feel of our clothes, the way people are talking, all these sorts of things are coming in all of the time at the same volume, and the textures and all of the senses are bombarding us at the same time. If you have a routine, it means that you are taking away some of these extra things that are coming at you. So, for example, I have the same lunch every single day. 4 years I've had the same lunch with the same stuff in it. Slightly vary it sometimes to push the boat out, but it's the same. And if I'm off to a cafe or somewhere else like that, I've got to change what I have. But when I go to the cafe on Fridays, I have the same bloody lunch for years. I go to the till, they know what I want already. And the point of that is I know how it's going to taste, I know how it's going to feel, I know when it's going to arrive, I know how to buy the stuff from the shop. The stuff's already in the fridge because I knew what to buy when I was in the shop. It's taken away so many additional things so that I can put my focus where it's needed to be on what I'm doing at work or whatever, because I know what I'm having for lunch, dealt with, problem solved. It's so many fewer things to think of, so many fewer things to cope with, and that is why getting out for us can be such an ordeal, because it's all of this extra stuff going on, and we're sometimes considered as slow processing. It's not slow processing, it's extra processing. If you have got 60 tabs open on your computer, then your computer's going to run slower because it's working on all of those things, not fewer things. But to the outside person, it feels like slower processing. So you say, what do you want when you're in a cafe? And someone takes a while to answer. It's because they're processing everything else that's going on, all the noises in that cafe, all the smells and sounds and expectations, to answer that question. So that's why it's been helpful for us as a panel to have the questions in advance, because I can prepare.
And what you, and I'll come to you in a moment, Clive, but what you and Stephen have both hinted at without directly hinting at it is the deficit in the sort of series of standard models of line management and organizational behavioral leadership that we have inherited from previous generations. And we talked a little bit about this last week, and I'm not looking for a commentary or anything. I'm just observing that it strikes me that the deficit is quite large, because what a line manager may sometimes apply to any colleague, whether they're autistic or not, is probably not going to function very well, and certainly won't function very well and achieve good results in terms of both of you commented about, and I know this from colleagues, you don't need to be told what to do. You just need to be told we need this, and you'll go and do it better than anybody else. And sometimes line management and seniority doesn't like that, because it sort of means that the power is not with that individual, and it doesn't matter where the power is the job being done. Fascinating, I think, and there's another subject of conversation in there, but we're short on time and I'm gabbing on. Clive, what's your answer?
Yeah, I guess I'm interested in the fact that we've paired routines and autonomy together in this question, and actually they don't necessarily sit together that well, but there's a reason for doing that, and it's that they are linked. Just as Stephen and Michelle have said, I have a relationship with routines, but I don't want yours. So I have gravitated towards jobs that have allowed me to create my own routines within the job. So I have deliberately gone for jobs that allow that for me to create the job for myself in a way. And so this only works if I have a line manager that trusts me. and allows me and believes that I will find my way, excuse me, to the solution and find my way to doing a good job through my routines that I create myself, and doesn't feel the need to impose routines on me because they feel that they're insecure and they need to know where I am. I'll enter into a contract with them and an arrangement with them to make sure that they'll always be able to reach me, but I'm looking for a really high level of personal freedom from my line manager. And what you get in return is a different standard, in my opinion, of work. So routines, I do have, excuse me, I'm just going to cough. I do have little personal routines. I went out a few years ago, went out the front door and didn't take my keys, locked myself out. That just can't happen. So I have a routine now that I close the door with the key. So if I haven't got the key in my hand, I can't close the door, and that's fixed. And since then, several years ago, I have never gone through the front door other than in that way. And I've also never locked myself out again. So that's how I use routines. It is about predictability, as Steve said, and feeling safe and secure. But it's also how I deal with a world that just feels incredibly messy to me and disordered and quite, there's lots of things that can go wrong. It's how I prevent those things from going wrong. It's how I make sure I'm a reliable person that somebody can rely on. And actually what that means is you can rely on me in a way that you would be quite surprised at just how dependable I can be. And I think there's a really positive thing there. It comes from routines for me.
Wonderful. Thank you. So we've got one more question. There are some questions in the chat, and Liz will have the poll thing that she's got to do later on towards the end. If any of you feel you want to stay on a little longer and ask questions, the panel's quite happy to stay on for a few minutes more and take those questions. And feel free to, if it's really burning, put your hand up. Otherwise, stick it in the chat, and we will get to it one way or the other. So we've got our last question, and I'm actually going to finish the order with Michelle, because I think Michelle's got some interesting context in terms of creativity. Not that it's exclusive, but from what you've said in the first webinar, Michelle, I think you've thought long and hard about this aspect, and so we'll start the question with Stephen, then go to Clive, and then go to Michelle, if that's okay. So how has your diagnosis resulted in creative solutions and approaches, and how have these been received by your employer, Stephen, notwithstanding present company?
The funny thing is, I can honestly say not a lot changed for me in terms of employment when I disclosed my my diagnosis. And I think it was because I've been very, very fortunate in the managers that I have worked alongside. They've always been really quite person-centered, not just with the people we support, but with me as well. So not a great deal changed for me. I think what really shifted was my own expectations of myself. And when we talk about creativity and creative solutions, it was me creating those solutions for managing my own energy levels, for managing my workload, for learning how to say no to projects and giving a little bit pushback, because I was always really, really worried and really anxious about saying I don't have the capacity to cope with that, because you're often, well, for me, it's the whole sort of paradigm with autism is that you are less than rather than different to. So, for right throughout school, right throughout my young adult life, it was always this kind of battle that I had. I remember getting thrown out of English class once, just as an example, because I was being quite pedantic. Shock horror, an autistic person being pedantic, but the question I was given was, what does this poem mean to you? So I expressed what I thought it meant, and the English teacher said I was wrong. And I was like, well, how can I be wrong? That's my opinion you've just asked for. I've just given you that opinion. Now you're saying I'm wrong. And there was this battle that went on because I knew I was right, but he threw me out of the class anyway. that was after throwing a stapler at me, but that's another story. Yeah, aye. And you know, so I got sent out of the class and everything like that. But if I understood myself better at the time, there is a chance that I would have had a better creative solution to that particular issue, like maybe shutting up might have been a good start, you know. But it is that issue that we have. It's more finding creative solutions for myself and how I manage things and how I do things. And those creative solutions can look really strange to people. You know, I often get looks when I'm out and about if I'm feeling anxious, my proprioceptive sensory differences are going, and I start like wringing my hands and, you know, sort of splinting and things like that. And I've got to the point now where I've created a situation where I don't care. And that's where my diagnosis has really helped, is that bit of me said, I don't care what you think of me. Whereas before, it would have been a really big thing.
Wonderful. Thank you. Again, fantastic insights. Clive?
Yeah, I guess my relationship with creativity, I think what I've learned from talking with my fellow panelists as part of the prep is that the way that creativity is expressed by autistic people is quite different, and you're going to hear that when you hear from Michelle. But for me, it's tied in with that very systematic way of thinking, which can also be rigid. So people would not necessarily see me as a creative person because they see me as someone who thinks in quite a rigid way, and I do. But as Michelle has said, I also do an awful lot of it. So I may be thinking and processing and problem solving when you've stopped and moved on to something else. So I will wake up having built a spreadsheet in my head, and I will have all the formulas. I will have the function of it, what its purpose is, and I'll have it built. When I then go to sit in front of the computer, I just enter the information into the Excel spreadsheet, and it exists in my head. That isn't because have some magical skills. It's because I'm processing. So I'm actually thinking and processing at a much deeper level than you might imagine, and I'm doing it whilst I'm asleep. But as I say, I will come up with things, particularly in Excel, and particularly creative solutions to problems. They don't come from me suddenly having an idea that's just visited me and landed in my head. It doesn't work that way. I've arrived at that idea through huge amounts of processing and testing ideas, thinking about the root cause, thinking through the problem, rejecting solutions. And so when I come up with something and you think, wow, that's really creative, for me, it just feels like the end of a logical process. But for other people, I think that's where my creativity maybe shows.
Again, you know, in the same way that I said, the comments that Stephen and Michelle had made in the previous question tend to hint at challenging orthodoxy. I think what you've just described challenges the orthodoxy of the divide between systematic, synthetic, and creative. Very interesting. Thank you.
Can I just also say, if we have time, there's something else that I'd like to say about challenging orthodoxy, particularly challenging senior managers. So that's a little bit of maybe a taste or a teaser for after the session. But if we want to get into a conversation, particularly about morality and ethics, because we haven't said that we'll cover that in the webinars, stick around afterwards and I'll share a story with you about that.
Great, lovely. So no pressure, Michelle. We wanted to build you up because you know stuff. So now's your chance to share the stuff you know.
Yeah, no pressure. I think you're coming to me for creativity because I'm a visual thinker and my creativity is obvious. I've illustrated a book by my book. I do social media, and the reason I do that is because I can be creative about a subject and then move on. For me, it's a lovely bite-sized way to just get out there and have a view on something. I'm very good at breaking down complex ideas and presenting them in a different way. I'm really good at analogies. You know, I like to help people to understand. But my creativity in my artistic skills is very, very obvious. but autistic people and the rest of the panel, there's a creativity in thinking, which is really, really important, and that can come through mathematics, engineering, science, philosophy, anything like that that's not as obvious as art, and it's absolutely appreciating somebody's way of thinking that's so different, and that is why we can be a real asset in a team, because everyone's thinking differently. And I'm not saying autistic people are better and do better than other people, but if everyone's thinking differently, then you might come up with more answers to a problem. But you've got to appreciate that difference, and you've got to leave room for it. I said in the chat, micromanaging absolutely kills me off. I cannot stand it, and many of us can't. Let me do it in the way I need to be able to do it. Don't make me do 9 to 5. Don't expect me to sit at my desk. I will be creative all over the place, in my way, and I will get the work, if not more than the work, done. So I'd come up with solutions. So, for example, trying to explain, I did an art conference, didn't I? And I was explaining social media to the room, and I compared different social media channels to Star Wars characters. And I've since I've since changed that to Simpsons characters, because some people don't know Star Wars, but more people understand the Simpsons. But it's that creativity in thinking outside the box, and coming up with solutions to things, that can really help people understand. And one of the things that's been massive for me on social media for Dimensions over the last year is making easy to read guides to all the stuff the government's doing over benefits, all the changes, all the scary stuff. I didn't want people to hear the wrong information or get very, very scared about all of the changes that were happening to benefits and the voting and everything that was going on with it. And the government information was absolutely awful, complex, detailed, boring, not accessible. So I created easy read guides to, this is what's changing, this is what's important, this is why it matters. And it went viral because people were saying, yes, this is what I need. And in easy read, I've found so many executives and board members love an easy read minutes or agenda, because it gets to the nub of the issue. It's that high level stuff that a lot of people in that level need.
Yeah, spot on. Well, thank you very much, panelists. You've given, I'm sure, a huge amount for people to be thinking about and processing. And we've got this poll, Liz, that we need to run. The questions that are, or statements, I think, that are in the chat, there are quite a few. There's one which I think Stephen's partly answered about the spoons theory, and you've given some answer to that. Another one is actually about emotional and nervous system regulation. And I'm wondering if anybody wants to, from the panel, wants to chat about that while Liz is setting up the poll.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure if I'm thinking about this in the right way. I did read the question in the chat. Maybe if I'm not thinking about it in the right way, stop me and just say so. But I'm sort of thinking about that question in terms of the sympathetic and parasympathetic autonomic nervous system, autonomic nervous system. So flight or flight reflex, really, in many ways, isn't it? And it's that whole business of how we react to things. And so I do need to do work in that area myself. And what I do is I've used sort of rhythmical breathing. So I'm breathing in for 4 counts, holding for 4 counts, breathing out for 4 counts. I find it easiest to do that walking for some reason. I think there's something to do with the rhythm of walking that makes that easier, but I can do it sitting still. And I can control my blood pressure. I can't control it, but I can influence my blood pressure by doing that. And if I do those exercises, my blood pressure will come down. So I do have hypertension, so I'm able to tell you what I know what my blood pressure is, and I also know how to influence it. So yes, I think that's an important part of, and I suppose the linking it to the spoons thing, when we've run out of that capacity that we've been talking about, that fight or flight reflex isn't very far away. So I can quite easily find myself being quite anxious and quite upset and not really sure why. because there isn't a single thing that's made me upset. In actual fact, I might fly off the handle at something that seems pretty small and irrelevant, but that's not why I've flown off the handle. I've flown off the handle because I've run out of spoons, I've run out of capacity. And that is about probably not spotting a little earlier that actually I do need to go and find some time for myself, just to calm myself down and sort of get a better grip of sort of emotional regulation. So I don't know if any of that's helpful, but that's sort of a personal sort of story from my side.
One of the barriers I've found to that kind of nervous system regulation is actually my interoceptive difference. So interoception is the inner workings of the body and your understanding of that and the knowledge that it's going on and where it's going on. So when I'm in a flow, for example, I won't feel hungry, I won't feel tired, I won't feel thirsty, I won't feel like I need to toilet and all of those things. But then when I pull out of that flow, all of that stuff comes rushing all at once. And they call it the Coca-Cola effect. You know, so when somebody comes along and shakes my bottle, everything looks fine, but inside the pressure's building. You know, and somebody else shakes it, so it's not recognized. I don't even recognize it. And then just like Clive said, somebody comes along and lifts the lid, and all of a sudden, whoosh, all of this anxiety, all of this emotion, all of this pent up sensory information comes rushing through at once. And it can be incredibly intense, it can be incredibly scary, and it does hit you into that fight or flight, where that front part of your brain that deals with your logic and your reasoning and your understanding shuts down. And you don't recognize these things. Everybody experiences that to a degree. You know, you'll know it after you've had an argument and you're in the shower a couple hours later and you think, God, I wish I'd said it this way. You know, that's that front part of your brain starting to wake back up. And this is a thing when we're talking about nervous system dysregulation and things like that we have to recognize within ourselves. And there is actually a great book on it. It was done by a guy called what was his name now? Sorry, it's called The Responsibility Rebellion. And I forget, to my detriment, who actually wrote it, but it's excellent. And the crux of the book
put
is...
it in the chat, Stephen.
Yeah, I will do. But the crux of the book is life is 10% what happens, 90% how you react to it. You can't control the 10, but you can control the 90. And it's about understanding that and recognizing it, which can be harder for autistic people when they have that interoceptive issue going on.
I'm going to move us to the... Sorry, Michelle.
I was just going to say, so very quickly, I know we need to finish, but I was going to say one of the biggest things we can do is work out how to gently open that Coke bottle regularly.
Yeah.
And that is what you need to do. Is if you did do that, you'd start to let that pressure out. So you might not know that you're hungry or all of these things, but you might understand that you're getting ratty or you're not able to concentrate, or there'll be other signs for you, things to look for. And that's what we need to do with people. We need to help. So you must go to the loo this often, or you must stand up at least this often, or look out the window this often, just to give yourself this little opening of that bottle, and it gives you a chance to come out of the in-depth thing that you're doing and realize, oh, actually I need to eat lunch.
Wonderful. For me, it's the chemicals in the Coke that worry me. Liz, I think you put the poll in, have you? Or
yes, slight change of direction with the polls. Apologies for the problem with Polly and Teams. Apparently it's a well-known issue. I've recreated it in a Microsoft Forms form, so hopefully everybody can access. Just 4 short questions just to get an idea of what everybody thinks about today's session, because it is the first time we've run these webinars. So it's really key to us that we can find out what's worked for you, and if there's any improvements we could make.
And don't forget, next week's one, we're focusing, again, we'll round up from today. We'll answer any further questions that come in the chat. Next week's about empathy and diagnosis. Those of you who want to stay on a little longer and further with conversation, please do. We'll start then with the bit that you wanted to share your story, Clive.
You're on mute, Clive.
Thank you, Steve.
Quiet as you've been all webinar.
Yeah, I I understand what you're saying, David. After last week's webinar, it was just something that struck me that was one of the significant experiences of my working life. And then I looked back at the questions we've put together for the webinar, and I realized that it doesn't really fit with any of the questions we've got. So I want to just raise it in case it resonates with Steve and Michelle, and also just if it's something that is useful and interesting. But it's about ethics. So autistic people tend to be viewed as highly ethical people, and I think there's some interesting stuff around that. My own personal experiences, I would tie that to the rigidity of thinking in some ways, because there's something about what is right and what is wrong that I'm quite rigid about, and I'm not sure that it. I may not be as ethical as people think I am. I'm actually just, that's right and that's wrong, which comes across as ethical. And the story I wanted to share with you is that when I was working, I told you I worked in the cattle market in Hereford. I was their company accountant, and we had thousands and thousands and thousands of transactions every day. So it's a really busy, complex, big numbers thing. And the bank statements, I got them on a Monday morning, and there was an additional, I think it was £20,000 in the account. So what we've been doing is we put 20 grand on the money market overnight. So that money would be working for us overnight. It would earn us some interest, and then they'd return it to the account with the interest in the morning. On this particular day, they returned the money to the account, but they also returned it twice in effect. So we're 20 grand up. So I phoned the bank and said, you've made a mistake. And they said, oh, have we? And fixed it, and that was that. I told my managing director, and he said, oh, that's interesting. Let me know if it happens again. Well, it did happen again, and I had already told the bank about it, and we'd given the money back. And he said, well, why did you do that? And I said, because it's not our money. And he said, well, next time if it happens again, don't give it back to them. And I said, that's not happening. If it happens again, I'm giving it back to them. And we're not having a conversation about it. I don't think he would ever have kept it, but he might have kept it for a little while and had the interest off it. So it did happen again. And on that occasion, I asked them, I said, if I hadn't told you about this, when would you have worked it out? And they said, we wouldn't. And when I told him that, the color of his face changed. He just couldn't understand why I would never think about doing anything other than ringing the bank. And I would do it all day long. I'd still be doing it. If it was happening now, I'd still be ringing the bank. I'd probably be saying to them, I'm getting a bit bored doing this. Could we find another way of doing it? Could you fix your problem? I'm never going to do anything else. And I think that can be quite challenging for senior managers. And I'm not saying I'm more ethical than my boss. I think I might be, but I'm not saying that. What's happening there, I think, is I don't have a choice about that. I just can't contemplate not doing that. There isn't an alternative to me. And I think from an employment point of view, I think that was quite an interesting conversation that he and I had, because he was never going to persuade me to do what he wanted, and he thought, as my boss, he should just be able to say, well, just do this, and that's not happening. And so there's some interesting stuff around hierarchy as well that comes with that. And I don't know if Michelle and Steve have some similar stories and examples to tell, but I think certainly through my work experience, through my work life, there have been lots of occasions when people have thought I've either been being unhelpful or I'm not respecting their position in the hierarchy. And here's the news, everybody. I don't care about hierarchy. I don't respect hierarchy. I respect people. And if somebody who reports to me is doing a better job than somebody that I report to, it's the person who reports to me that will get the respect, because it's not about position. It's about what you're doing. And I think that stuff can be really positive if it's understood. And I think for line managers, it can sometimes be quite challenging.
Spot on. Any closing thoughts from yourself, Michelle or Stephen, in that order?
I totally agree. My daughter went on a school trip to the Houses of Parliament yesterday and Wednesday, and she didn't have time, or they weren't allowed to eat before they got back on the coach, and she hadn't had a lot of time to eat lunch. So she hadn't eaten from 12 o'clock until she came back until 8 o'clock at night. 8 hours for children on the coach. Now I can imagine that the rule is you're not allowed to eat on the coach because a coach company said so, because they don't want to be cleaning up anyone sick. But the unwritten rule was if you sneak a Kit Kat while you're on the coach, we'll turn a blind eye. So I could kind of get that. But my daughter was told you're not allowed to eat and did not eat and was starving. And a lot of the kids were hungry, but she was absolutely starving. So I complained. But it was just that rigidity of thought and that justice sensitivity around what's going on. So she can be really, really upset if someone else is getting told off in a room because she's feeling an injustice. If it was kind of an unjust or over the top bit of telling off that's happening in classrooms normally, it's that injustice. And I'm with you on the hierarchy thing, and that gets me in trouble all of the time. I find it really easy to just speak to the CEO. I do get depressed when they treat me like an intern because of my job role. But not that there's anything wrong with interns, but some people just have this whole hierarchy thing. And it doesn't make sense to me. If you're great at your job, then I will respect you for that.
Spot on. Stephen?
Well, I think, I mean, I have my own theories on the hierarchy thing because I'm very much the same as Michelle and Clive. I respect people rather than position. But I think a lot of that comes down to that monotropic thinking, because I have to learn every person that I come into contact with bespoke. I can't generalize positions. I can't generalize, right, you're a CEO, therefore you act this way. You're a deputy manager, therefore you act this way. It doesn't work with me, and it doesn't tie in to what I know to be true. And it's so I have to learn each individual person as they come into it. Now, if somebody perhaps when I entered the workplace said, this is what you can expect from this person, this is what you can expect from this position, this is what you can expect from this position, then perhaps I would formulate my interactions according to that. But we never ever do. We never, when somebody joins an organization, we never ever tell them what to expect from each position. So, you know, my difficulty is that I then have to formulate my understanding based on what you do, who you are, not what somebody says your position is. But it's the same for the people that we support. I can guarantee you there's many managers as there are on this call. How many of them have ever sat down with the person that they support and told them what a support worker is?
Yeah.
We do, you know, it simply doesn't happen. We do, but we expect the autistic people to generalize those skills. When I'm sorry, but generalization for me is really difficult. You know, it takes. I can do it, but it takes a lot of energy and a lot of my spoons to be able to generalize skills in that way. I learn them bespoke, and it's that monotropic attention to detail, and the people that are within positions for
Thank
me.
You, our 9 minutes of unofficial session has been absolutely fruitful. I can't help asking Carol, because said dog has been an integral listener in the program. What is said dog's name, please? We've got to be introduced.
His name is Ben.
Hello, Ben. Thank you, Ben. Obviously, very interested in what's going on, and very interested in being tactile with you. So nice to see. Lovely. So thank you once again, everybody, for participating and spending a little bit more time. A very rich session again. I think the one next week will be exactly the same. Lots to think about. If there are other questions that come into the chat, we'll answer those. Have you had a good response, Liz, so far to the poll?
Yes, we've got some responses to take a look at, and some great ideas for future content as well. So thank you to everybody who's responded.
And thank you, everybody, for giving up your time. Very much appreciated. I hope your afternoon goes well and that the weekend goes even better. Okay, thanks for your time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.